Everybody. My name's Tom Medema, and I am the Associate Director for Interpretation and Education and Volunteers for the National Park Service here in Washington, D.C. So I've been with the National Park Service for 30 plus years. I started teaching residential environmental education before that, and then became a volunteer and a seasonal employee at Rocky Mountain National Park, and then worked at a lot of places since then, and now find myself in Washington, D.C. helping run the entire National Park Service from here. So I feel really fortunate and anxious to spend a few minutes with you guys today.
Absolutely. And is it okay if we just jump right into some of the student questions?
Let's do it.
And guys, I know that some of you have emailed me questions. Feel free to, if you had not, feel free to send your questions in the chat, and we'll let you ask them to Mr. Medema. And so, Tom, what kind of advice, we'll go back. One of the kids from France wanted to know what were some of the things you were interested in when you were growing up? Like, what were some of the subjects you studied?
Sure. Yeah. And a great personal connection to France. I've been able to work over there a couple of times at the American Battle Monuments Commission cemeteries in Normandy and Nancy, training some interpreters and educators in France. And so also been able to go to the Tour de France myself. So I have a great love and affection for the country of France. But I didn't have that growing up. I didn't do a lot of international travel, but we did a lot of travel in the United States. We did the big summer vacations. We went to the big West Coast trips to Yellowstone and Grand Canyon and Yosemite when I was, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old. And then we did the big East Coast trip in 1976, which was the bicentennial of the United States. And it was a big, big, big celebration here in this country. And we went from Washington, D.C., where I live now, up through Philadelphia to see the Liberty Bell, up to the Statue of Liberty, up to the Revolutionary War sites in Boston, and up into New York. And so that was really where my passion for history, was anchored, I guess, in my early years. And just quickly, the thing that's so amazing to me is that in a few years, in 2026, it'll be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and of the United States. And I am now in Washington, D.C. as one of the senior planners for America's birthday in 2026. I never would have thought that in 1976 when I was 10 years old in fourth grade, but here I am. So it's my passion for national parks and the outdoors comes from my family, all of that travel and experiences from when I was a kid.
Sure. And can you talk about, were there any type of historians or figures that were kind of quintessential to your upbringing and kind of the direction of your career path, maybe even like a John Muir or Franklin Roosevelt or Teddy Roosevelt?
I would say that I didn't discover some of those conservationists until a little bit later in life. Early on, it was certainly the figures in United States history and some of the early founding fathers and American presidents, that we talk about so much, with George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, go down the list. And now here, I find myself learning so much more about the depth of American history, the diversity of American history, all of the concepts that have made us the country that we are today beyond just the stories of the founding fathers. But it was kind of that inspiration, I think, in that history that really grabbed me at a young age. I didn't really discover the John Muirs of the world and the Teddy Roosevelts and the other kind of early conservation movement until much later, when I was really getting started in my career. I was kind of a late bloomer in that regard. So I've learned a lot since then. But early on, I think it was just that early American history that was really compelling for me.
Sure. And for our friends, both in the United States as well as overseas, especially our younger kids, I know that I was very interested in history growing up. What kind of advice would you have for these kids if they want to become active in some of the parks or museums that are in their local communities? What can they do?
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about the national parks too, is they're so diverse. Whether you are into natural history, botany, biology, whether you are into being a historian, an anthropologist, an archaeologist, or in outdoor recreation, hiking, paddling, fishing. There are parks and museums and historic sites out there, for everyone. So I think getting involved early, in my own daughter, she's 23 now, and she works as a ranger at the George Washington Memorial Parkway. When she was in high school, she volunteered in Yosemite National Park. She was on the black bear team. So they would go out and survey black bears. And she volunteered for the anniversary of the National Park Service. So I would say if you have local museums, zoos, aquariums, national parks, volunteering at those places introduces you to so many different ways of teaching the public and of learning about these jobs. I am the volunteer program manager for the National Park Service. We have 300,000 people a year who volunteer in national parks. Huge number. I started as a volunteer, and my own kids started as volunteers. So there's great opportunities there for you to explore different career paths just by volunteering a couple hours a week or just occasionally, so that you can see what the professionals do. You get to know them, they get to know you, and you're like, I don't like doing that. Or I really love that, and so you get some experience that helps you, but it also just kind of opens your eyes to all the opportunities that are out there. So I would think hard about those kind of things that you're really passionate about, because that's what it is. It's really about what your personal passion is, and follow that passion and look for those opportunities and just raise your hand and put yourself out there, take a risk, and volunteer for some of those places. And you can learn a lot in a really short period of time.
I love that you're pursuing passions. And that's one great thing that our students are being taught. We have a question from Olala, and she is in Spain. My apologies if I mispronounced your name, but you had an awesome question. Go ahead and ask Mr. Medema.
Okay, hello, nice to meet you. My question is, what are some of your favorite experiences working in the National Park Service?
Yeah, there are so many. That's the beauty of it. So I love interacting with people. That's why I got into the field of interpretation and education. I am no great historian. I am no great biologist. What I am is a communicator, and I love to talk to people. And what I find is that good communication is really hard to learn. You can learn the facts and figures of a place and of a park. You can learn about new species. You can learn history. Learning to be a good communicator is really difficult. And that's why public speaking terrifies so many people, because it's a hard skill to learn. And so connecting people in the outdoors, taking them on guided walks and talks, explaining to them the amazing geography, geology, and history of a place, and seeing the awareness, the recognition and the learning come across their eyes, and connecting people, that is certainly a big part of it. And then I'll also say, since you're in Spain, and we've also heard from France, and next week I leave for Peru for 2 weeks, that connecting with national parks around the world has been a tremendous passion, of mine as well. And over here, over my shoulder, you see, when I talk about passion, I also have a passion for motorcycles. And so I ride motorcycles to national parks all over the world. This particular photograph is going to a national park in Mongolia, over in Asia. And I have been over there to many national parks in Mongolia, 7 different times, and been to parks in Argentina, going to parks in Peru next week to visit with rangers, to talk about the work that we do to help them and support them. And again, that's just because of my own passion. I raise my own money to do it. I'm not paid to do it by the Park Service. That's on my own vacation time. So that's how passionate I am about all of this and those experiences and connecting people with public lands and with parks. So that's, my favorite thing to do, again, is to visit with people in parks, both visiting public and also other rangers, to just share the wonders of these places and their history.
Absolutely. So that's the Gobi Desert?
That is close. That is not from the Gobi. The Gobi was a different trip, but this is the northern Gobi. This is in the Kazakh region of Western Mongolia, far Western Mongolia. So you're very close there. Yes.
That is intense. Back in my younger years, I used to run ultra marathons, and there's a very famous race, and it's one of the driest places in the world. So yes. My hat is off to you for going there and visiting there. Not many human beings have. I wanted to see if you could tell the kids on here, because I think that this is one of the coolest things about you is the different parks that you have worked at throughout your career. Can you talk about kind of the travels that you've gotten to experience working in conservation?
Yeah, for sure. Again, talk about, Alaya talked about my favorite parts. I've been to 250 or more of our national parks and historic sites. And I've been able to work in Alaska, in Denali National Park, which is this image. It's a photograph that I took that I turned into a poster with the Denali Mountain in the background, the highest mountain in North America, incredible landscape. And then even my honeymoon, when I married my wife, Cindy, back in 1992, we honeymooned at Virgin Islands National Park in the Caribbean. So I have just kind of tied every bit of my being to travel to parks and places. And I was talking to Ralph as we came on. When I moved from Yosemite to Washington, D.C., I visited 40 parks in 10 days with my dog. And I stopped in each place and visited with a ranger in each park, from Manzanar historic site in California, which is a site of Japanese incarceration, where our government put Japanese people in prison during World War II because we were afraid, to some of our southwestern Native American sites like Navajo National Monument, where indigenous communities still live and thrive today, to some of the Civil War sites in Mississippi and in Tennessee, where we fought against slavery and changed the course of American history and abolished slavery through the Civil War, and then up into the Northeast in DC, where kind of some of those early ideas of democracy, were formed, and other natural sites along the way. I've worked in Yosemite National Park for 15 years. My kids got to go to school in Yosemite. And part of going to school in Yosemite is every Wednesday for physical education. In the wintertime, you go skiing. So we took the whole day and went to the ski area on Wednesdays in the wintertime if you were going to school in Yosemite. And Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, which is, again, my wife Cindy's favorite place. That's where we were engaged and where we met. And then so many big and small historic sites in between, from Cleveland, Ohio to Fort Vancouver outside of Washington, D.C. I worked at Mount Rainier National Park in Washington on the side of a volcano. So it's been recreation areas, big natural parks. I got to spend a month at the Grand Canyon studying and learning to be a ranger back in 1992. So yeah, just a remarkable number of places that tell the full breadth of American history and our natural landscape, but we keep adding to that story. We keep adding new units to the national park system all the time. And I'm going to one tomorrow in Mississippi, the Medgar Evers Home, which is a civil rights site here in the United States, from the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And I'm going to visit that home for the first time tomorrow. And so when new sites come online, I'd like to be able to go and be one of the first people to experience that and learn it, so that I can help spread the word about what that place adds to our national story.
Yeah, and just to give an idea to our students in Europe, America, like as a whole, it's about, what is it, 25, I had to Google this, 25 million square kilometers. That's just how big. So this guy, our special guest, has been almost everywhere as far as you can imagine. Like, I've never met anyone who's been to the far reaches of all sides of the country. So
I'm fortunate that I've been now to all 50 states. I just got the only state I hadn't been to was South Carolina until last year, and I finally made it to South Carolina for whatever reason. So I've been away. All 50 states are amazing in their own way, and I'm grateful.
Yeah, it's definitely vast. And I wanted to see if you could maybe talk a little bit to the students. Is there one moment in your career where I'm sure you've had a lot of moments where you're like, wow, I can't believe this is what I do for a living. But is there like one moment that truly stands out? Like maybe like your proudest moment professionally?
Proudest moment, I guess I will reflect on these trees. There's a reason I have these images in my office to remind myself every day. So this is the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias in Yosemite National Park. And if you look on my shirt, you maybe recognize the arrowhead of the United States National Park Service. This right here is a giant sequoia. Every ranger wears a giant sequoia on their uniform. I don't have my hat here, but it has the cones of a giant sequoia on my hat and on my belt. Every ranger in every park, from the Virgin Islands to Denali National Park, wears a giant sequoia on their uniform. Why is that? Because that's where the idea was born in 1864, before Yellowstone. President Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, set aside the Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. He gave them to the state of California to be preserved forever. So every ranger honors that first moment. And the visitors to the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias for the last 150 years had just destroyed it, driving and hiking over the roots of the trees, just all millions of people every year. And so we had recently a restoration activity, and we took the parking lot there and we removed it. You can't park up there anymore. You can only take a bus in and get dropped off to walk around. We renovated the restrooms. We created natural water courses again, where we had moved them and channeled them because of the road system. And I was able to go back to the Mariposa Grove here when I was here in DC. I was able to go back 3 or 4 years ago and speak at the grand opening of the Mariposa Grove. And I have a photograph standing there at the podium with the giant sequoias behind me, just acknowledging the history, all of the work, the indigenous communities connection, the tribal people that were there, all of the work that went into restoring the Mariposa Grove, and the fact that every ranger wears it every day. I guess that's probably, it gives me chills, I guess, just even talking about it. It was a very special moment because of what it means to the National Park Service here, but also protecting spaces around the world, because the US National Park System was the first of its kind anywhere in the world. And it's because of the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias in Yosemite National Park.
We would love to see that photo. So if you have a scan of that, definitely email it and we'll put it in the footage.
Yeah, and yes, I'll send you a link too. I think I have the recording of the address that I gave. And so that might be, but yes, I'm sure I've got some really amazing photos. There was a mounted rangers on horseback with the flags, next to me there. And it was amazing scene.
That has to be definitely the pinnacle of an astounding career. And for those of you who don't know, like Abraham Lincoln is just generally, we just accept him as one of the best presidents of all time. It's just generally everyone agrees on. And those sequoias are massive, right? Like they're prehistoric trees, correct?
Yes, whatever room you're sitting in right now, wherever you are, the trees are bigger than that. So I can guarantee, unless you're sitting in a warehouse somewhere, whatever room you're sitting in at home or at school, the base of one giant sequoia is bigger than the room you're sitting in.
That is intense. And I've seen some photos where they even carve out like the road. So cars back in the day, or were those the redwoods?
Those are the giant sequoias. Yes, they did. They did carve roads so you could drive a car right through the tree.
Like the trees are they look like the side of a mountain. And
now those trees are dead now because they cut a big hole in it. But
yeah, I would.
It was a great experience for people for a long time.
It's frowned upon. Well, we have a couple more questions and we'll let you go. This is Jesus, and he is one of our friends over in Spain. Jesus, you had a pretty interesting question. Go ahead and ask, friend.
Hello, nice to meet you. I have a question for you. Have you ever been in a difficult situation in your job?
Many difficult situations. Most of them, I would say, in Yosemite. Yosemite is a place of dynamic landscapes. And so I dealt with many fatalities in Yosemite. Many visitors die there in the water. The waterfalls in Yosemite are 500 meters tall. And we have visitors that swim up above and they fall over the waterfalls, and we have to talk to their family. We have many rock falls that come in and fall on buildings, flooding that happens on the roads. So many tragedies in a park like Yosemite. It's so wild, it's so dynamic, that many times over the 15 years that I worked in Yosemite, I had to deal with many different issues like that. People climbing, rock climbing, fatalities there. So I would say the human loss that can be found in some of our wild places is definitely the most challenging part of the job. And so we work so hard on our education initiatives to teach people how to be responsible and be thoughtful, and don't walk up to the edge of the Grand Canyon to take a photo. Don't walk up to the edge of a waterfall to take a photo. Don't walk up to a bison or a bear to take a photo. right? We all want to be on Instagram. We want to be famous. And yet it can result in tragedy. And I have unfortunately had to deal with many really sad situations because of those, bad choices, but also just accidents, rocks that fall from cliffs and wildfires and things like that. So those have no doubt been the most difficult parts of my career. It's very wonderful, of course, as we've talked about, but no doubt in these wild places, there is a lot of tragedy as well that you sometimes have to manage. It's a good question.
And that's very interesting. My wife, she is from Wyoming, and so with Yellowstone right being there, she talked about would people not respecting like the selfies with buffalo or taking photos of that is just completely, I can't wrap my head around that people would do such a thing, but these animals are absolutely massive.
Yeah, people come from all over and they've never been in these wild spaces before, and too often they just don't know how to behave. And so we try our best to educate as many as we can, but we miss some, and yeah, bad things happen.
Respect the land. Always respect the land wherever you're at. So I'm sure if you guys are in Spain, Italy, and France, you guys have wild animals too. So if we are over there, definitely remind myself and Mr. Medema, hey, we should respect it too. So our final student question is going to come from Italy, and this is one of our awesome students. Her name is Mev. Mev, you should be able to unmute to ask your question.
Hello, hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
I would like to know, in your opinion, which of all the national parks that you visited, which one is the most natural, surprising, unique, and if you can you describe it to us?
Well, you know what I'll do? I will answer that question by giving you my favorite, which is always a surprise for people. My favorite park of all of the national parks is Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore in Michigan. It's near where I grew up. And if you've been to the ocean and you've been swimming in the ocean where the water's warm and you're on the beach, then you can imagine what it's like to be at Sleeping Bear Dunes, because it's on Lake Michigan, one of the Great Lakes, so great that you can't see the other side. You cannot see Wisconsin and the land from the other side, but it's not salt water, it's fresh water, and there's no sharks. And the sand is warm and it's golden color, and it's great for paddling, for swimming, and great for hiking. And then in the wintertime, it snows. So skiing, ice skating, those kind of things that I love to do, cycling. And the cherries in the summer and in the fall, the fruit from the cherry trees and the fall color. It has all of the seasons of the year, which is another thing I love, is fall with fall colors and cold winter with snow and a beautiful green spring and then a warm summer. Sleeping Bear Dunes has that. So when you have a chance, just Google up Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. And people are often surprised that that's my favorite. But also they don't even know that it exists, because you just hear about the big ones. And some of the smaller places like that are just amazing places to visit. So I would have to say, yes, Sleeping Bear Dunes. And I'm going to retire there one day because I love it so much.
Sleeping Bear Dunes, guys, I grew up right near there. That place was massive. So picture a lake. We have these lakes that they have their own storms, they have their own currents. They're so massive you cannot see the other side of it. They look like oceans. And Sleeping Bear Dunes, it's like a beach, but it's like straight up. Like the beach is like straight up. Sorry, I'm excited. All things Michigan. Okay, so before we let you go, because I know it's super late where some of our kids are at, and I know you have a lot of important stuff to do. Is there any advice that you could give to these kids as they go off in the world and they kind of figure out what they want to do, whether they want to work in the Park Service or conservation, or they want to do something completely different? As someone as accomplished as yourself, what advice would you give to them?
Be fearless. Say yes to the opportunities that come your way. You know, if I hadn't said yes to so many things in my career that were maybe a little scary, maybe I wasn't quite ready for, maybe I didn't think I was a good fit for, but I said yes anyway, took the risk, I would definitely not have ended up where I am today. I certainly would not have ended up on motorcycles in Mongolia, Patagonia, Bhutan, Peru. in other parts of the world. And that's why I am where I am as a ranger, because I said yes to doing the volunteer thing that I really didn't have the money for. I couldn't really afford it, but I made it work. I'm fortunate and was a little bit privileged that way. But that's just for me, even thinking back to when I was in school, I was just adventurous and willing to say yes, take some chances, fall on my face once in a while, get embarrassed. It doesn't matter, because that's, I am who I am, and you learn from every experience. And so for me, that's just been kind of the way that I have learned to live. And I kind of came by that on my own. Nobody told me to do that. My parents live in Michigan. They've always been in Michigan. They don't tend to leave Michigan too much. They do some traveling. We did some traveling in the summer. And, that was my dad. Nobody told him to take those family trips, right? It was just something that they did. And so that my advice, is just, again, and that's part of your passion. Don't question it, follow it, take that risk and be fearless.